Truth is the daughter of time. I don't know if that's a phrase that you're familiar with. But what it basically means is that as certain as a baby is coming in 9 months, if you are expecting, so truth will come out eventually in time. And we see that in our story today and in our story next week as well. In 2 Samuel 7, we were on the mountaintop. One of the peaks in the story of the Bible tells us that David received a covenant from God. David wanted to do something for God, but God said, no, I'm going to do something for you. I am going to give you a kingdom, and that kingdom will last forever, and the Messiah will come through your family and save this world from its sins. That is a high point in this entire story, a high point in the Bible. But since then, we've been sort of going downhill rather rapidly, and it has not been an easy journey off of the mountaintop. In 2 Samuel 10, 11, and 12, we read about David. That's all right. We read about David and Bathsheba. The only reason I close this door is because I get distracted by it. Oh, she's going back out. We love it when people come forward in church. It's all right. We've all had children. All those who have children, don't they do things like that to you sometimes? I remember kids like crawling all the way to the back of the church and all the way to the front underneath the pews. I remember, that would have been yours. I forgot that. You know, we all have great moments to remember our kids by and then to kill them later. Maybe we kill them first and then remember the fun later. I think that might be more appropriate. So in the last couple chapters, David has been on a downhill slide and has not been pretty. He has committed sin. He's tried to cover up his sin. He's been found out. He's repented. All kinds of things have happened to him. He's been forgiven, but there are consequences that continue on from this sin. And that is what we are coming to today as we reach really the bottom of the pile. This is Death Valley. And you can't get much lower in David's life than when his children start to kill each other off and to follow his pattern, the things that he has taught them just by the way he has lived. He is a good and godly man, but he has flaws, and those flaws have consequences. Nothing in 2 Samuel will be the same after David has committed these sins, after he has shown some of his true colors in this world. Nothing will ever be the same. There are consequences. We talked about that last week. The punishment is gone, but there are consequences to our behavior that lingers on. I believe that God takes away most of the consequences of our evil choices. I don't believe we suffer half as much as we should just because of the stupidity or the evil that we do. I think God takes away a lot of that. But there are consequences. When Adam and Eve sinned, there were consequences. There was a little girl who was sick one time, and she said that if Adam and Eve had never been sick, or had never sinned, I wouldn't be sick. But then she thought about it a little while. She came up with a problem with that, because if Adam and Eve had never sinned, we'd all be sitting here naked. That was a problem to her. I don't know if she would rather be sick or... I don't know. But there are consequences to our behavior. There is a connection between David's sins and the sins of his family. And the author does some very subtle things to show that. He talks about David's sons. He talks about Amnon pretending to be sick. You know, just like David, didn't go off to war. Amnon pretends to be sick. There are some very subtle things, and all of these are connected, showing us the connection between David's sins and the consequences of his behavior. What he sowed privately, he reaps publicly. Truth is the daughter of time. And the truth of David's life, the truth of his character, the truth of his sins comes out publicly, even though he tried to eliminate them and to hide them. In the first introduction that we have in chapter 13 here, the first two verses, we have a sort of an introduction to our story today. This horrible event that occurred with Amnon raping his sister. It starts off by saying, in the course of time, which is where I got my sermon title. In the course of time, all of these sins come out. All of these consequences happen in the course of time. We read about Amnon. Amnon was the crown prince. He was supposed to be in line for the throne. He was the number one kid, and he was in line for everything that David could possibly give him. We read about his sister, or half-sister, Tamar. And Tamar is this beautiful young woman, godly young woman, brilliant young woman, who is caught in the web between her two brothers. Absalom is her full brother. But really, even Absalom doesn't really look after his sister the way he should. Now, the way this story is set up, if you read this carefully, you see that actually what we have here is Absalom mentioned first, and then we have Amnon mentioned last, and in the middle, trapped between these two brothers who cannot get along. These two brothers who have desires that they cannot control and not enough virtue to control them is Tamar, caught in between the two. It says, and it happened thereafter that Absalom gets mentioned first, David's son, tying us into that sin, had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, David's son, reminding us of the connection between David and his sin, loved her. I don't know if this is real love or if this is just lust or whatever it is. And I don't know that it matters. He wanted her. I think it might have started off as true love. But he wanted his sister. In that day, that wasn't horrible. We understand genetics and we understand some things, but in that day, it was allowed. It was possible. And we end this section, if you read on through chapter 14, Absalom is actually the last word in this whole entire section. We start with Absalom and we end with Absalom. And next week we're going to talk about more about Absalom's problems. Absalom is really the key villain in this whole piece. Absalom is the one the consequences of David's sin affected the most. We saw this connection between the sons of David. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And if you can see that little boy up close, he's picking up an apple off of his dad's arm. That's a really tiny child. The apple never does fall far from the tree. Consequences will come out. And then we get to this horrible story. Tamar is beautiful. As I mentioned, I think she is also godly. I think she is also wise. I don't think Amnon likes her for her brains. I don't think Amnon likes her for her godliness. It says that she's beautiful. On the other hand, it says Jonadab is shrewd. He was the smart one. He's going to figure all of this out. And he is held up in contrast to Tamar. She's beautiful, but Amnon is shrewd. Now, Jonadab is the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. And it seems, if we read between the lines and try to figure out exactly what's going on, that there may be a power struggle as two opposing camps set up forces inside of David's family. Shemaiah and Jonadab, they may be going after the throne. It's kind of hard to divine. But they may be going after the throne and causing trouble among David's sons. Or they may just be supporting Amnon against Absalom, against any of the other sons. And there seem to be setting up conflicting camps here. Jonadab asks Amnon what's going on, and he says, I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Again, we see the brother-sister connection. Now, in Hebrew, and I know the Hebrew words, but I can't tell them. They're a secret. In Hebrew, this comes out in gasps and starts. It's so passionately, violently in love. I'm in love.